If you want to, very good, thanks. So welcome to our third workshop for the Innovative Idea Competition. This is the 24th annual Innovative Idea Competition held here at Temple University, put on by the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Institute. And tonight, the focus of our workshop is going to be on getting to know your competition. So I've mentioned before in previous workshops that when you enter, there are 6 areas that we ask you, ask questions, and we look for you to supply information in response to these specific areas. So we're looking for who your customers are, the user, the stakeholders. That's worth 10 points. What's the opportunity or problem that you've identified that you're trying to solve? That's worth 25 points. The competitors and status quo, meaning what are they doing today? What are those people who have this problem? What are they doing today to solve that problem? And that's highlighted in yellow because that's our topic for tonight, okay, is competition and understanding the competition and the status quo. And then your solution, which is, what's the idea that you have? How does it work? Being able to explain how it solves that problem and how it's better than the competition. And then another section, which is on the elevator pitch. And tonight, that's highlighted in yellow again, because I'm also going to spend a little bit of time talking about elevator pitches, how you structure them, what should be included in them, and maybe even give you a chance to work on your elevator pitch a little bit tonight. And then last but not least, one of the questions we ask is, what's your plan for addressing unknowns and challenges that you may have identified as you've been working on this idea? All right. So it's one thing to say, hey, I know I have all these unknowns. Maybe it's a technology, maybe it's what business model to use. But regardless, there are unknowns or challenges that you may be facing if you're thinking, how does this idea, how's it really going to be work and be implemented? And what we'd like to know is not the answers to all of those, but we'd like to know what's your plan for addressing them. All right, so how would you methodically go through and try to get answers for those? All right, so it's, again, we're not asking you to have the answers because that takes time, and you've only got a few more weeks left, and we don't ask you to go that far for this competition. But we do want to know that you've at least thought it through and you've got some kind of a plan of how you go about getting those types of answers. All right, and if you don't know that, you still have some time to figure that out, right? Okay, so let's start off with, competitive information. Where do you get it? All right, there's lots of different sources to gather competitive information. And, one of the things you really need to focus on is making sure that you've done your homework. There are lots of old expressions. I'm a big fan of old expressions. It probably just dates me. But, one of them is ideas are a dime a dozen, meaning that, there's lots and lots and lots of ideas out there. But what really makes a good idea is something that's differentiated from everyone else, that provides real value, more value than the other solutions out there, that has a competitive advantage over the other solutions out there. All right. And so one of the ways to get started is to focus on your customers and understand who your customers are. And your customers are a great source of information to get to know about your competitors. All right, it might seem odd, but it's true. So where do you gather customer information? Well, one is you can certainly use census data. There's lots of information that's available. And a lot of that is available through the Temple Business Library, where you can gather information on the particular demographic that you're targeted on to learn about them. All right. There's also relevant surveys that you may want to do. Put up a quick Facebook survey, or maybe you have your own list of contacts, friends, and family that you could send surveys out to gather information if they would be potentially in your target market. All right. And then, there's also ways by looking at doing Qualtrics surveys, looking at social media or running surveys on social media, et cetera. So, one way to get started is, with a focus on your customer. And at the bottom, I have this note about talking to prospective customers is essential, because again, one of the concerns is not just who are your competitors, but what are your target market, your customers, potential customers doing today to solve that problem. And the only way you'll really know that is to go out and either observe them or talk to them. And so getting close to your customer, getting out of your dorm room, out of the building, as they say, and actually interacting with your target market is really important. All right, another place that you can get competitive information is from the industry. So the particular industry that you're interested in, whether it's fashion or cosmetics or medical device, some type of medical device, or food trucks. It can be any type of industry that you have a focus on. You should see or investigate whether or not there's any trade association data. Typically, well-established industries have trade associations that represent the various companies within that industry, and they typically gather information on their member companies and publish that. So you want to look at trade association data. You also want to take a look at articles that might be published specifically on that industry to gather information. Any type of journals or white papers that might be out there, again, most likely found through doing searches online or through the Temple Library. And then, of course, I strongly encourage you to utilize the Temple Business Library. And Adam Shambaugh, who's over at the Business Library, is a tremendous resource and has been an invaluable help to a lot of the students that come and work with us at the IEI. A lot of the new ventures that are launching utilize him to help do market research and research on competitors within their industry. All right, other competitor information that you can find and it's available. Well, one is if they're a public company, you can do a search on the investor analyst reports that might be out there on that particular company, or again, analyst reports on that industry. You'd be surprised, again, depending upon the industry you've chosen, you'd be surprised what's out there and what you might be able to find. Investor day slides and calls. So a lot of companies do shareholder presentations, a monthly presentation or quarterly presentation, and a lot of investment firms like VCs or private equity firms will also do calls to talk about what they know in the industry or about their member companies. So take a look at those and see if you can leverage any of those for information. Google, just Googling for the particular problem that you're trying to solve, Googling for other solutions in that area that solve that same problem. If you know of existing competitors, Googling them, but do Google searches to see if your idea exists, all right? And that's something you should do fairly early in the process, because you'd be surprised. Oftentimes, students, have a great idea. They do all of this information gathering and research and thinking through how they would implement this idea, but they've never done a Google search. And when they do, the week before the competition submission is due, they find out that there's 10 other competitors out there that they didn't even know about. So do a Google search early on for other products or services that might be similar to yours, because you want to be aware of those. All right. And then another great source that I strongly encourage you to do after you've done the Google search is search on Amazon, search on Alibaba. They're the two largest retail platforms in the world. So take advantage of that. You can find almost anything that exists out there on Amazon or Alibaba. And then also, if you've got a software-based product, like something that's based off of an app, go to the two main app stores, right? So go to Apple Play, the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and take a look to see what other apps are out there. Now, last week in our workshop, one of the students proposed an idea, just kind of off the top of his head, and said, I think this would be a great idea. And while he was talking, I quickly did a Google search and found multiple articles about that particular problem, and things like here are the top 10 apps for that particular thing, and they hadn't done any research yet. And so it was a good example of how doing one quick basic search will help save you a lot of time and wasted energy. All right. And then lastly, in a more general sense, there's treasure troves of data that's available in government databases. And again, this is where Adam Shambaugh at the Business Library can really help you. There are also some pretty good, very focused websites and databases that are out there. Crunchbase, which is a database that's used by a lot of startup ventures and angel investors, where they're searching for startup ventures to see if they might want to invest in them. You can use that as a source of general information. There are plenty of paid databases that you can tap into, but I will tell you, if you're a current student at Temple, you will get access to many of those paid databases through the Temple Business Library. So again, a great reason why you want to talk to Adam Shambaugh, and please leverage those as kind of your basic sources for general information and research on your competitors. All right. Now, for the idea competition, this area that we ask you to focus on, which is competitors and the status quo, we're asking you to really think about these 4 questions. So number 1 is, how's that problem currently being solved? That's the status quo. All right. Number 2 is, what are the issues with the current solutions? So just like finding out how the problems are being solved today, you might commonly know some competitors. You might decide to go out and talk to some prospective customers to find out what their current solution is. And you'll find that maybe they're using a direct competitor, or it may be that they've come up with their own homegrown solution. All right. And that's something that could be just as threatening to you as far as being able to successfully launch your idea as a direct competitor would be. Could be just as threatening, all right, is because if someone's got a really simple, straightforward, cheap status quo solution, and you can't provide them enough value to change to yours, they're going to just stay with that. So it is something you do have to take into consideration. And you won't know necessarily what that status quo is until you've talked to prospective customers to find out what they are doing. Now, could be 99% of the time they're using a competitor, or it could be that 50% of the time they've come up with their own homegrown solution. So that would be important to know. The next one is understand that there are different kinds of competitors. All right. I've often heard students come back or alumni come back and they say, oh, I don't have any competition. I've done my research. There's no competitors out there like me. Well, that may be true, that there's no exact solution that's like you, that's packaged the same way, sold the same way, delivers the exact same value as you. But there might be alternative solutions, okay, or alternates to that direct competitor. There might be substitutes, other things that people are substituting and using here and there. It isn't a full-blown solution. It doesn't solve the whole problem, but it does enough for them that the customer's satisfied. All right. And you do need to be aware of those alternates and substitutes. And then there's also indirect competitors. All right. So in some instances, if you're looking for a full 5-course meal at a 5-star restaurant, okay, running to Wawa to get a hoagie, that's not a direct competitor. But if you're hungry and you're looking for something just to, get rid of that hunger pang, that might be a completely acceptable indirect competitor to what you're offering. So you need to be aware of all of those categories: direct competitors, alternates, substitutes, and indirect competitors. All right. And when you're formulating your answer in this section of your submission, you want to try to address all four of those four different types. And then last but not least is, so if there are all these competitors out there, right, different types of alternates, substitutes, etc., all right, what about them is missing? What's suboptimal? What is it that they aren't doing? Where are the gaps where somebody's got a problem, they're solving part of that problem, but hey, there's this whole big gap there that people still aren't really happy with, okay? Now, maybe that solution or the alternate substitute solutions are trying to address it, but they're failing. So that's an opportunity for you, because if you can find gaps where your competitors are failing and come up with a way that you can fulfill that value or provide that value, that just makes you a stronger solution, right? And it helps to boost and give them reasons why they should drop what they're currently doing and move over and adopt your solution. So they're the four areas that we're really looking for you to try to address when you think about competitors and when you draft up this part of your answer for your submission. Okay, let me see if I can run this quick video. So can you see that, Lindsay, or no? You can't see that, right? The YouTube video?
No. Oh,
okay.
Play your slide.
All right, hang on. All right, I'm going to show you a quick video. This is just really short, and it talks about competitive advantage. And so this is a concept I want you to become aware of, because it isn't just enough to know how you're different from your competition, but you need to know what your unique competitive advantage is as well. How are you different and better? And why would people want to come to you instead of others? All right, so I'll just show this and then we'll talk about it for a minute.
Hi, my name is Erica Olson. Today's whiteboard session is on competitive advantages. Now, before we get all confused about what a competitive advantage is or isn't, let's just know that it's going to take you some time to develop it. And I don't mean time such as hours expended, I mean time thinking and perhaps several years to really get to that core. So if you put it on your strategic planning agenda, competitive advantage, just know that you're going to have a conversation about it, but you may be having a conversation about it for several years until you get down to that essence. So what is a competitive advantage? It answers the question, what are you best at? So let's stop there for a moment. You don't necessarily need to be the best in the world. You may not need to be the best in your state or in your country. You just need to be better than your competitors at what you do in delivering value to your customers. Another way to think about it is, why do your customers buy from you, right? Why do they buy from you? Well, I'm here to tell you that if you have a competitive advantage clearly identified, that means you don't do anything that doesn't actually get you to customers paying for something or giving you money for a value that they want to receive in exchange for dollars, of course, right? So let's look at how we actually put a competitive advantage together. What are the components? And I really think asking this question, what are we best at? And let's not forget, really at the core, it is our DNA. What's your DNA? This is my little handy dandy formula. Your company name, I've got my example, your company name plus what you're best at and why. That why question is pretty hard. So let's take my example. Bikram yoga. Bikram yoga is a practice of yoga that is, of course, done in yoga studios. And what they're best at, they've done an amazing job at productizing the yoga experience. So what do I mean by that? They have franchises all over the United States that do exactly the same type of practice. And they were able to productize it by, again, that means setting up a pretty consistent process and a very specific yoga practice that nobody else had. And by doing so, they were able to package it and franchise it. So the folks that actually did this, their competitive advantage, and they, of course, they trademarked it as well. Their competitive advantage was the ability to take something that was a little esoteric in nature and actually put it together so that everybody in the world, if they wanted to, could buy that particular process and sell it within their community. So competitive advantage, again, as I mentioned, it's going to take you a while to get to. Ask those hard questions of yourself and your management team and keep coming back to that question of, what are we best at? And again, as you've heard me say, don't forget to ask your employees and your customers, because they can really help you answer this question better than probably you can. So Erica's tip, once you have your competitive advantage, what the heck do you do with it? It needs to be built into your strategic plan. So all of your goals and objectives and your mission and your vision all need to support the development and the reinforcement of your competitive advantage.
Okay. So let me stop sharing that. Okay. So I like to talk about that because I think it's important. Again, Erica mentioned how, competitive advantage and identifying that isn't necessarily something that's going to jump off the page at you. It isn't something that you have to have for this competition. But I think it's really good to plant the seed now and have you in the back of your mind thinking about that, because at some point, people, if you decide to take this idea forward, people are going to ask you, so what's your competitive advantage? Why you, right? And it's something you should almost always be thinking about. And something else she mentioned is that everything you do within your business or your idea should all be about trying to provide value to your end customers. And so it should all be supportive of whatever you've identified as your competitive advantages. And again, you don't need to have just one competitive advantage. Don't stop there. If you have multiples, that's even better, because that makes it harder for other people to come into the market to compete against you. And it makes it harder for the people already in the market competing with you for them to try to catch up and overtake you. All right. So, she asked this question, right? What's your competitive advantage? And you typically say, hey, my company is best at and why. So I don't know if we can do maybe a straw poll or something, Linz, and just, show of hands, if we could get people to indicate how many of you have ideas, how many of you on the call tonight have ideas pretty well locked in, what you're going to be focused on for the Innovative Idea Competition. Can you raise your hand? Raise your hand. Where's my control screen and why? Oh, there it is. Okay. I don't have any raised hands. So no one has their idea figured out yet for tonight. Okay. Well, if that's the case, then I'm going to encourage you, go back and look at the video from week 1, the first workshop, which is focused on trying to identify your idea and help you, work on coming to something that you feel you'd want to take forward for the Innovative Idea Competition. All right. Again, let me ask this question then. Does anybody have something that they feel that they've identified as a competitive advantage today over their competition? Maybe I'll just start asking people. So Tanner, how about you? Is there any competitive advantage that you feel you might have over competition today?
It's tough to answer yet because I don't have much of an idea, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay,
all right. So let me point this out as well. A lot of times people think of, a competitive advantage has to be, how my product or service is better, all right? And that's not necessarily the case. You might have, you might have an idea for, a teapot, okay? And your teapot might physically not work any better than other teapots that are out there on the market. But your competitive advantage might be in how you've packaged it, in how you service it, in how you, share different ideas on your website for different variations or types of, different teas that you make with your teapot. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the product. It could be about the way you offer the product, package the product, sell the product. And again, this applies to product or service, all right? It might be, aftermarket service or support. It might be on how you build customer relationships. All of those things factor into your idea. Okay, so it's not just about what they say, the widget, the teapot. It can be about the entire customer or user experience that might be the area where you're actually better than the competition. All right. Okay. So let's keep going then. In this particular case, I don't want you to get frightened away if you don't have a competitive advantage identified. Again, as I said, and as Erica said in the video, some people might be working on their idea for a year or two until they've really been able to hone it down. But I do want to plant that seed. I do want you to be thinking about that because I think it's important for you to think in those terms. All right. So I have another short video I want to show, which talks a little bit about maybe the do's and don'ts about how to present competitive information. All right. So I'm going to ask you to watch this, and then we'll talk a little bit about it afterwards. So again, let me.
Spending too much time prospecting? Introducing Lucia, the perfect tool for any company size.
Sorry about that. All right, can you see my screen, Linz?
Yeah. I see your desktop.
My desktop? No, that's not what I want. All right, hang on. All right, here we go. Okay.
Got it.
So this is a video that comes from Dream It Ventures, and it's actually a tremendous website. Dream It is an organization that focuses on supporting startup ventures, and they do a series of short 4 or 5 minute videos on various aspects of the startup process. So this one's specifically on competitors. So here we go.
Welcome to the Dream It Dose. In the next 5 minutes, we'll talk about how 80% of startups make huge mistakes when talking about the competition. And it's deadly critical that you get this right. Luckily, it's pretty easy to fix. Let's dive in. The first mistake I see entrepreneurs make is they truly don't even understand who the competition is. They haven't exhaustively done a search. The number of times I meet with a startup, they tell me who their competition is. I do one detailed Google search. I flip my Macintosh around and say, wait a second, what about these other three? I haven't even mentioned them. And they'll say, I don't even know who those are. I mean, did you spend any time on this issue? Don't be like an ostrich and stick your head in the sand, because you're going to get run over by a big truck. And that's going to be an investor that you meet with that knows more about the competition than you do. I mean, it's like when you were a little kid, right? And you'd be in your dark room and you're not going to open the door to the closet because if you don't look, the boogeyman won't be there. This is the boogeyman. Embrace it. Search for the competition. Make sure you understand it. Keep your ear to the ground for new competitors emerging and embrace that with strong emotional intelligence. Now the question is, once you know that information, what do you do with it? Well, let me tell you where not to start. And that's with the magic quadrant. There is nothing magical about it. Don't use them if you're trying to differentiate. Why? Can you only differentiate on 2 axes? I mean, it's so artificial. It's complete bullshit. If you want to show how you're unique and you're different, you're not going to use a magic quadrant. It's gone, it's over, it's dead. And oh, by the way, you can throw its friend, the Venn diagram, out the window as well. I know I'm going fast. Please leave your questions in the comments and make sure to subscribe. We have a lot more coming. So we talked about what not to do. Now let's talk about what you should do. And that's going to be showing your competition in a table and grid format. Now let's break that down and talk about what you actually do inside the table. First, the columns are going to be the individual companies, and you're going to go first. And by the way, I'm assuming if you're watching this, you read and speak English. We read left to right. That means you go first in the leftmost column. The competitors go next to you going to the right. What order do those competitors go in? Pretty easy to know. If I asked you who are the top competitors your customers or investors are going to ask about first, they, in priority order, are going to be the next columns right next to you, because you're going to spend most of your time differentiating over your 2 to 3 biggest competitors. That's how you're going to handle that. Next, let's talk about what you're going to do in the rows. And those rows are going to be the benefits that you deliver, not the features. What are the benefits you're delivering to that end user or that end customer? As you talk about the benefits, another big question that comes up is, what is that order? Pretty simple. I have a question for you. What's your biggest, strongest value proposition? What's your biggest differentiator? Those are the benefits that should come at the top, and almost in a sorted order. What are those benefits from top to bottom? Strongest benefits up top, strongest differentiators up top, coming down. Next, let's talk about what do you do in the middle of the chart. Pretty straightforward. First of all, for all those benefits we talked about, try to make sure they're quantitative, not qualitative. So if you say faster, I'm going to want you to start talking about how much faster you are. Don't just use that description, faster. But as you fill out the middle of the chart, what I want you to think about is, sure, you're going to put check marks for where all the things that you have as a benefit for your particular product and maybe your competitors. But here's what I don't want you to do. Don't litter up and muck up the chart with lots of X's where it doesn't fit or the functionality isn't there, the benefit isn't there. Just leave it blank. Open up the chart, make it cleaner, make it easier to read, easier to process. If you have to, you can use Harvey balls. Like if you're 100%, it's a solid ball. If you're only 50%, it's a 50%. Or maybe there's a number in there. But if your competition doesn't have the capability, just leave it blank. And remember, you can go beyond your product when you're talking about the competition. If you have unique differentiators that really set you apart, it's related to your distribution strategy, pricing, business model, no long-term contract. Put that in here as well. We see a lot of entrepreneurs that make a mistake that just talk about the product. Investors and customers often want to know other things that make you different, that may seem obvious to you, but are huge differentiators. List them as well. That's it. That's how you make sure you truly understand who the competition is and that you're communicating it clearly so everyone else understands how you're different and unique from the competition. So what are your key takeaways? 1, make sure you truly understand who the competition is. Number 2, magic quadrant, gone, dead, in a box, buried forever, and its friend, the Venn diagram, yeah, that's in the box too. Number 3, you're going to build it as a table. You've got the columns, you go first, top competitors go next to you. Coming down on the rows, it's the benefits, and they're in priority order. And remember, leave it uncluttered in the middle. Just put the check marks to the numbers where it applies. If it doesn't apply, leave the X's blank, leave them out, leave it clear. That's your Dream It Dose in about 5 minutes. I look forward to answering your questions in the comments. We'll see you next time.
Okay. So the first thing I'll say is, and you thought I talked fast. All right. So he covered a lot in just 5 minutes. And, I want to try to, over the next 15 minutes, go into a little bit more detail about what he was covering, in case you have any other questions about it. So, the first thing, and also one other key point I want to make right at the very beginning here is that, he spends a lot of time focused on how you present this information, right? But buried in there is also some really good information on how you want to do this competitive analysis or how you want to do this, competitive comparison. Okay, so one is, focusing on benefits, not features. All right, the days of going out and buying computers, much less anything else, and focus on specifications, like how much memory does that have, and how many or how big is the disk drive of a computer. people aren't really focused on the feature set anymore. They're focused on the benefits that are derived from the feature set. And that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons why Apple went from a very, very small market share in the computer market to being a dominant player, is because they said, you know, we're not even going to try to get into the game of talking about RAM size and how many gigabytes of memory and how big is the hard drive. And no, we're not interested in that, because that's what people aren't interested in that. What they really care about is, you know, how many pictures can I store? How much music can I put on my computer, right? They wanted to know the benefits. They wanted to be able to quantify it, and they wanted it to be presented in a really simple way, some way that they could easily understand. So telling somebody, you know, I've got a 1 terabyte hard drive, you know, doesn't tell them much. But if you say, hey, our hard drive's big enough to store 150 full DVD movies, plus, you know, 20 years worth of your pictures from your, you know, your photo library. Oh, and by the way, your entire music library for you and everybody in your family, that you can understand. And it's a whole lot easier for you to digest. So think about that in terms of what are the benefits that you're providing to your prospective users. Again, not the features necessarily, but why or how are you making that user's life better? All right, so now let's go back to how it's presented. Whoops, let's go back to how it's presented. You know, he says start with the grid, benefits top to bottom. You should be the first column, and then most significant competitors from left to right going across the top. Okay, now I've heard people express concern. You know, they'll say, well, hey, I've got competitors in 2 different markets because I'm bringing a product that has functionality and serves 2 sides of a multi-sided market. How would I do that? Because I have, you know, 2 completely different types of competitors. That's okay. What you might want to do is pick the top 1 or 2 from each side and show them on this grid. All right. Or another way of doing it would be you'd want to show 2 completely different grids, one which is focused on one side of the market and one that's focused on a different side of the market. Okay. So we have that. As he mentioned, you're going to be looking at what kind of benefits that you're providing, and you're also going to be trying to quantify them. As he said, it's not enough to just say we're faster. Well, how much faster? It's not enough to say we're cheaper. Well, are you 5% cheaper? Are you 50% cheaper? That gives your prospective user or an investor, you know, a quantitative factor to be able to evaluate that. Not just that you're better, but how much better, right? A small marginal, I'm 3% better, in some cases is almost not even worth mentioning. And so why would you focus on that? But if you were actually 50% faster, then yeah, you'd want to let people know that, right? Either your prospective user or a prospective investor. All right. Now, you may be taking courses, you know, marketing courses, finance courses, economics courses, where they still are using that grid and the 4 quadrants. You know, we don't recommend that. Dream Adventures doesn't recommend that. And the big reason is because you're limited. You're limited to just 2 axes. You can only measure 2 things in those types of charts. And so here, you know, depending upon how much space you have and how many benefits you can list, you can actually give a much better, well-rounded perspective of different types of benefits. And again, they don't have to be necessarily where the benefits are related to a product as much as it could be to the whole user experience. So for example, one of the benefits might be, hey, we're easier to buy. We're easier. We made it easier to buy our product or service, or we made it easier to service our product. All right. So look at the entire user experience and think about not just the product or service you're providing, but how you provide it how you make your customers aware of it, how you support them after they've purchased it, how do you continue to support them by building relationships with them. All of that might be part of your competitive advantage and part of what you want to show as one of your really key featured benefits over your competition. All right. This is an example of a slide that one of our past teams that's come through the accelerator program, what they showed as their competitive slide in their pitch. All right. Now, first off, I have to admit that they didn't follow the Dream Adventure guide because the company was Simply Good Jars, and Simply Good Jars, rather than being in the first column, is in the last column. So they didn't quite follow the rules there. All right. They did follow the rules in that where there wasn't necessarily, the competitor had the same kind of benefits, they left it blank. So that serves the purpose of not cluttering up the chart. Okay. They also quantified. So for example, under equipment cost, rather than saying, hey, we're lower in pricing equipment costs, they just cited that equipment cost is a category, and then they showed the quantitative difference by putting the actual dollar value in there. Another thing that I would point out here is that, you need to think about, well, who am I presenting this information to? All right. In some cases, it may be you're presenting it to end customers, and that's almost as if you're pitching them to use your product or service. And in other instances, you may be trying to pitch this more to an investor to try to get funding to launch your business or to support your idea. And by the way, I keep talking about businesses and businesses, but the idea competition is open to for-profit and not-for-profit ideas. All right. So you may have a service that you're providing, and it may be in a not-for-profit model, and that's fine for the idea competition. All right. So in this particular slide, Jared Cannon, who's the founder and CEO of Simply Good Jars, he was looking at what are the key benefits he was providing in his fresh, organic, packaged salads that come in a recyclable jar. That was his business model, right? And he was selling them, initially, he was selling them in vending machines all throughout the city. And so some of the benefits that he felt came with his product were, it's organic. Hey, my product, because it's organic and because of the way it's packaged, it has a pretty long shelf life. In fact, longer than some of his competitors. In some cases, people are tired of junk food type lunches. And so in his case, this was a produce product. All right. It was, grown, and it was organic, and it wasn't processed. All right. It wasn't processed food. He also was saying, one of the benefits is that I can offer not just salads, which could be for lunch or dinner, but I also can offer breakfast, like granolas and mixed grains and things that come in this, packaged jar container as well. And then one of the key benefits that he felt he was providing is, a lot of people are really concerned about the environment. They're tired of seeing all this waste going in trash cans and landfills. And so he'd come up with a way to recycle his packaging, which was a real benefit. Now notice at the top, okay, he also was showing benefits that aren't necessarily going to be attractive to his customers, but benefits that would be attractive to potential investors. And that's another way for you to think about this, right? If you've got a competitive advantage in how you get this business launched, or how it can be supported from an investor perspective, and it's more attractive to an investor than another competitor, that's another thing that you'd want to leverage. So in his case, he's showing that, hey, you can invest in my competition, Farmer's Fridge or Bite, and it's going to cost you $20,000 or $7,000 per site to go ahead with this type of idea. But if you invested in Jared, he's saying, hey, I can put my retail location out there, and it's only going to cost $4,000. That's a real benefit because it's 5 times less expensive than one of his competitors, right, to put this out there. Also the tech component. So Farmer's Fridge was a custom-made machine, which is one of the reasons why the equipment cost was so expensive. And Byte was relying on RFID technology, radio frequency technology, and tagging, which has some technical issues and also has some limitations, more importantly, where Jared was using a proven technology that existed and had been used in other markets, and that's just smart shelving. Shelving where you load up the product onto the shelf, it's automatically calibrated, and when someone takes it off the shelf, it knows how many you took off the shelf and then can charge you for it. All right. And so again, he felt that that was a real benefit from an investor perspective because he was using a technology that they knew, understand, and had a true advantage over these other two. So you can see how he's pulled various aspects of his idea, not just the product itself, but also the startup costs, also the technology being used as a ways to identify benefits to the end user and benefits to prospective investors, and to paint a nice picture and an attractive picture of why Simply Good jars was a better choice than these other competitors. All right. Now, as part of your innovative idea competition submission, we don't ask you to even do this chart. Okay. That's not part of your submission. But I think this process, it's a great way of showing you how to think about evaluating the competition, trying to determine what really is important, what are the most important benefits that you can provide. Obviously, they're the ones you want to feature against your competition. You don't want to pick things where you're not as good as the competition, all right? And you also want to be picking benefits that are the most important to your customers. That's what's really key, all right? If your customers are looking for you to solve a problem and in 4 or 5 different areas, okay, and come up with some kind of a solution that addresses those 4 or 5 different areas, you want to make sure that you're solving their most important problems, not their least important problems. So again, talking to your customer, getting to know your customer is really important. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for a second, and I want you to take a minute to digest this. And if you have any questions, let's talk about them now in terms of how do you think about your competition? How do you research your competition? How might you want to evaluate them? How you might want to present this information back? Any questions or thoughts? Did I lose everybody? How many of you have done competitive analysis so far? How many of you have gone out and done some research, even minimal research, like Googled to see who your competitors are? Has anybody done that yet? Wendy, you have?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you haven't? Okay, all right. I wasn't sure what the red X meant, sorry. And by the way, if you're checking the chat window, Lindsay's been putting some really good information in there. Jared, most recently, was actually on Shark Tank back in March of this year and landed a $500,000 investment, as she's pointing out there. So, we've had some really great success through Temple University. Students, undergrad and grad, and alumni who've decided to, launch ventures based off their ideas. So you never know, you never know, the sky's the limit. He's a great example of somebody who really was in an industry, working in an industry, but had an idea and came back to Temple University to get his master's degree and then launched his company. And he's starting to really have some success with it now, which is great. All right, so nobody has done any competitive searches yet? Nobody wants to be brave and admit it or not admit it? No. All right, well, you're making it really hard for me to talk about it because I wanted to try to hear what some of your experiences were and to see if you had any questions about it. Okay, let's keep going then. All right, so if there aren't any other questions on competitive advantage, I want to take the last few minutes here and talk a little bit about the elevator pitch, because if you remember at the very beginning of the workshop, I mentioned that one of the elements for your submission is to create a short elevator pitch. And so an elevator pitch, think about it, is you know, typically, let me see if I got that. Yeah, an elevator pitch is just, you know, it's a short 60 seconds or less statement or explanation that talks about your business in a way that gets people interested in it and makes them ask you questions because they want to know more. All right. It's not trying to tell them everything about your business in 60 seconds. It's telling them enough about who you are, who you're serving, what problems you're solving, that they want to know more about you because it's an interesting concept. All right. Okay. So again, telling an elevator pitch really requires you, it's a lot of work to do, even though it's only 5 points in the submission and in the rubric, the way the judges are going to score it. But it's all about telling a story. All right. And so here's an example that we've given. These people have this problem that costs them this much. That might be one way that you start off. I have this thing, this product or service that solves this problem by doing this. Okay, and then explaining what it is you do. Others can't do this because, you know, I have unique technology. I have patented technology because I have extensive experience in this industry because I've done this for the last 5 years myself and I've learned all about it. Okay, whatever the barriers are, whatever you have that people sometimes call the secret sauce. Now, that might be you got in-depth knowledge in the industry, or maybe one of your partners does. So a lot of people enter the idea competition with a partner, all right? And they're working on their idea together. And so one may be very strong in one area, one may be strong in another. And in fact, that may be one of your barriers, is the strength that you have as a team, because you each are strong in your own area and you're complementary that way. Okay, and then here's how I make it, or here's how I do it, here's how I provide it. It's just the last piece of the story that makes people understand that you know how to do that, that you actually believe you can do that. All right. So that's one way of approaching telling this story, but there are many, many, many different ways. And we actually, in the shared resource folder, when you register for the idea competition, we'll share a link with you to a resource folder. The resource folder has all of the workshop recordings, the workshop slides. It has our submissions guideline and tips document that I think Lindsay put into the chat a while ago, that gives you a step-by-step breakdown of the questions that are asked that you're going to need to answer as part of your submission. And by the way, if you haven't looked at that yet, you really want to look at that now as soon as possible so that you know the questions you're going to have to be answering and you can work on them and write them all up before you go to the portal to put all your submission in. All right. So back to the elevator pitch again. Okay. So one rule in doing an elevator pitch is you got to assume that your audience knows nothing. All right. And oftentimes you'll hear people say, elevator pitches should be geared at about the 7th grade level. All right. So you need to dumb it down Don't assume that people are going to understand any technical jargon, all right, and keep it really simple. So I'm going to show you some examples of that in just a minute. You know, a lot of times elevator pitches use short sound bites, okay? They have to be simple to understand, but they can be hard to develop and to refine so that they are simple and elegant, all right? You know, it needs to be clear and concise, all right? You want to try to use action-oriented language, all right? You have to propose or pose a problem and then position what your solution is against that problem, all right? I think if you think back to the first example I gave of telling a story, right, it tried to do that. I mentioned it has to elicit questions. If at the end of doing an elevator pitch, somebody says, nice, and turns around and walks away, then you didn't accomplish your goal, right? Your goal is for them to go, that really sounds interesting. Can you tell me more about? And then they start asking specific questions. That's the goal, all right? And then, as I mentioned, you want to avoid using technical jargon or using instead use analogies that will be easier for people to understand, okay? And remember, at this point, it isn't a sales pitch, all right? There's a different focus. It's a different audience. You're trying to get people to ask you more about your idea because ultimately you want to draw them in and potentially they're a resource for you to help you launch your business. All right, so here's an example of a company and an elevator pitch that they used, all right? So I'll give you a second to read that. Can anybody tell me what this company does? So I'm going to assume that's a no. I can't tell you what this company does from looking at this. All right. Thanks, Kasser. Yeah, I can't tell you what this company does either from looking at this, right? It's a bunch of jargon, you know, buzzwords, monetize, underutilized assets. Well, what type of assets? What type of underutilized assets? And then access to those available assets. Well, what are the available assets? You know, what are social ties, right? It's just way too vague. And while you might fully get bits and pieces of that, all right, you might be way off base in terms of what they really mean by it, all right? So what you need to do is think about how you can take something like that, break it down and make it easy. So again, one of the shared resources, documents that's in the shared resources file is a document that's all about templates for elevator pitches. And in there, we've offered you two different templates. One is called this Mad Libs elevator pitch, and it's really simple. You just fill in the blanks, right? So your company, whatever your company name is, pick a good company name, is a whatever, all right? Pick a noun and an adjective. We're a service platform provider, you know, we're an app, we're a food truck, we're a fashion brand, whatever your idea is. All right. And then that's developing. And then what is it that you're developing? What is it that you're offering? Right. To help this group of people. So who's your defined audience? That's really important. And again, some of these elements we covered in the earlier workshops the last 2 weeks. Like, for example, you know, who's your customer and what's your audience, right? And then to solve a problem. So what is that problem you're solving for that group of people? And we, again, earlier workshops, we said, you've got to understand what your problem is that you're solving. You need a good, concise problem statement. If you don't know the problem you're solving, it's going to be pretty hard to solve it. You'll be all over the place and it won't be a very focused type of solution. So what's the problem you're solving? And then we're doing that with or by, and whatever your secret sauce is. It might be some type of special algorithm. It might be using artificial intelligence. It might be using some new technology that you've developed, or some new tool that you propose on developing. But whatever that secret sauce is that makes you different. And again, each of these needs to address what I've mentioned in the previous slides. All right. So I'm not going to go any more on that. So here's again that example, that soundbite laden example that I showed you before. And you can see with some work, you can actually take that and make it much more understandable by just being more simple, more direct. Okay. So, you know, we're an internet service company. We're developing an online marketplace. HIP professionals gain access to desirable vacation properties. All right. Now, monetizing underutilized assets, all right, was the desirable vacation properties that weren't being fully booked. But would you have known that from the statement of monetized underutilized assets? No way. You had no way of knowing that, all right? While earning money and property by taking advantage of their social networks. So that's the social ties and the real life exchanges. But I think I hope you'd all agree that that second version is just so much easier to understand and explain. And one good test of this is if you give an elevator pitch to somebody and then you ask them to turn around and explain what you do to someone else and you listen to them. If they can't do it, then you don't have a good elevator pitch. Your elevator pitch isn't quite there. And no one expects you to come up with and nail a perfect elevator pitch on the first time out doing this. It's just impossible. All right. It takes lots and lots and lots of practice. Our goal here for the Innovative Idea Competition is to get you started, get your feet wet, get you involved in thinking about this, because guess what? We have more competitions coming up after this, where you're going to get to take this idea that you've come up with and refine it and keep working on it and then try it again. So after this competition comes the Changemaker Challenge, focused on social impact or environmental impact ideas. All right. And then after that is the Be Your Own Boss Bowl in the spring, which is all about how do you take your idea and now turn it into a potentially viable business. How could you really turn it into a real business? And for each of these other competitions, guess what? They ask the same thing, which is, what's your elevator pitch? So it's something you'll be thinking about and working on, and it only gets better when you share it. All right. It's not something that you can do alone in your room, in your dorm, by yourself. You can work on it that way, but then you have to share it with people and get feedback on it, right? That's the only way you'll know where you're missing the mark, when you share your elevator pitches. All right. So, you know, another, this is going to work here. I hate when this happens. Oh, there we go. So, you know, another example is somebody says, you know, oh, I work on nanotechnology to deliver medical therapies targeted to targeted cells. Okay. Again, I wouldn't know what that means. But if somebody says, well, wait a minute, we're using manufacturing techniques of the computer industry to make better vaccines, I can get my head around that. All right. So it's a manufacturing process that you're using. And, oh, by the way, these are things coming out of the computer industry that's focused on making vaccines. All right. That's so much easier to understand. And then what's the question someone might ask you from that? Well, there's tons of questions. Well, what kinds of vaccines to serve what purpose? Or what kind of manufacturing techniques are you talking about? Or what part of the computer industry? You don't know where their interest may lie, but it gives them more of an opportunity to ask questions because it's a much simpler statement for them to follow. All right. So again, there's a document that we have in the shared resources folder, and I actually am not sure that this is the right link, Lindsay. This might be the old link from last year, but Lindsay has shared the correct link in the chat window. So if you go back and look in the chat, you'll be able to find the document for or the shared resources folder link, and then you'll find this document that's in there. So we give you, you know, some samples and a guide, an easy guide for you to follow to help you with this. All right. If any of you have taken any of our IEI courses, 0827, 3501, lean startup, you might be familiar with this template as well. So for your targeted customer who's got a customer need, whatever their need is, whatever their problem is, okay, your idea name, whatever your company name or your product or your service name is a blank. Again, it's a product, it's a platform, it's an app that provides one key benefit. What's just one key thing that you do that's really going to be interested to customers. So if you go back to that competitive analysis chart, that would be the benefit that was listed at the very top. And then unlike your competition, all right, and you're going to name who they are, all right, so if you were in the streaming business, okay, so unlike Netflix, unlike HBO, unlike Hulu, our solution is different because, and then how are you different and how are you better? So it's another way of presenting your idea. Okay, so for movie buffs who rent DVDs, Netflix is an online service that simplifies the whole process. Unlike Blockbuster, which probably none of you remember because you're not old enough, which is sad, but unlike Blockbuster, our solution offers a larger selection, door-to-door delivery, and no late fees. Again, this could be updated because they don't even do that now. They're doing all streaming, right? But you hopefully from this example, you'll get the idea. Okay, so I'm going to close on these couple thoughts. You know, a big new idea is great, but you don't win the competition unless your elevator pitch is clear and concise. We've talked a little bit about that. All right, what's your value proposition? So what are you doing? What benefits are you providing, and who you're providing those benefits to? That your opportunity is clearly explained, and the opportunity is derived from some problem that you've identified that your target users have. They have a problem. This has created an opportunity. You're here to solve it, right? That's all part of your story. Okay. And the problem's worthwhile. And another factor, again, we talked about this in an earlier workshop, is that your target user group has to be big enough. Enough people have to have this problem that it makes it worthwhile to solve it. It makes it worthwhile to spend all the time and energy and heartbreak in being an entrepreneur to actually push this forward and do it. All right. If it doesn't, then maybe you want to shift the problem and look for something else to be working on and solving. Okay. You need to make sure who your users and/or who your customers are, and that's clearly identified. And in some cases, customers and users are different. So for example, if I was talking about cereal, right, breakfast cereal, in most cases, it would be the kids who are the users. They're the ones that are going to eat it, but it would be the parents who are the customers because they're the ones buying it. So in some cases, the users and customers are the same. In some cases, they're different. All right. And then you might want to share with us, like, how did you come across this problem? It may be that you suffer from this problem. And as is the case in a lot of people, their ideas come from the fact that they've had a problem and they want to come up with a better way to solve it. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with starting from that perspective. But again, you need to test it and make sure that there are enough other people out there that also have that problem, feel the same way about it you do, and that think it's important enough that they might want to change from what they're doing to what this new solution is that you're offering. All right. And if you didn't identify this problem because you have it, it may be that friends or members of your family have it. It may be that you work part-time or volunteer in a senior citizens facility and you notice that they're suffering from a particular problem and you really want to help that group solve that problem. All right. So how did you identify the problem? Okay. And have you verified this is really important. So have you tested it and talked to people to see that they share the same perspective? All right. So with your solution, okay, not just is it easy to understand, can you write this up Can you write up your submission so that it's easy to understand what your idea is and how it works? But also, is it feasible? Make sure that technology exists to make it feasible. I once had a student who said they were going to develop an app to transfer battery power from cell phone to cell phone through the app. And when I asked them, what's the technology you're using to do that? They had no answer. And I wasn't surprised, because at the time there was no technology to do that. There was nothing out there to do it. So don't propose something, and we will use as an example the flying car. Don't propose an idea that everybody would love to have, but oh yeah, by the way, there's no technology that makes that doable at this point in time. All right, again, you don't have to be an expert on the technology, but at least do some minimal research that shows that, hey, that technology exists, it's being used over here in this industry, and I think we could bring that over here and use it for this application, right? You don't have to have proven that out. You just have to have been able to do some minimal research and then convince the judges in your write-up that, yeah, I found it, I've read up on it, I think this can be, miniaturized or converted over to this application. And that's one of my unknowns and challenges, is I have to be able to go out and do more research and find people that are technically, competent that can help me evaluate that. And that's an acceptable answer. All right. Again, demonstrating that you know who the competition is, what your strengths are and your weaknesses, and if there are gaps that the competition hasn't filled, that you may have a plan on how to fill those gaps, which is going to give you a leg up. All right. And how are you unique or better? And then lastly, identifying the unknowns and challenges that you've discovered, and then what's your plan to solve them? You don't have to solve them. You don't have to have all those answers, but you should just have a plan. I'm going to do additional research on this technology. I'm going to investigate how to start up this particular type of company to provide that kind of service. I'm going to research hosting companies because I want to develop this app, whatever it is. All right. Any questions before I do my last final wrap up of the competition? But any questions on the content of the workshop for tonight on competitors, competitive analysis, or on the elevator pitch? I talked almost as fast as the video. No questions. Okay. So I'm gonna take that as a positive, because I need a win today. I'm gonna say, hey, this is great. You've digested all this. You're raring to go with your ideas. So just to wrap up, here are some key dates about the competition. We're encouraging people to register. You can use this QR code. I'll leave it up here for a second. Hit it with your phone. Register. That makes sure that we send you the link to that file in case you didn't capture it. It'll also make sure that you get reminders on some other upcoming events that we're going to be doing. The next two events are going to be our peer mentoring, which our Entrepreneurial Student Association does during the afternoon from 12 to 1. And then we also have an expert mentoring night that you'll be able to participate in, where you can come on to a Zoom call and meet one-on-one with mentors who've worked with us and worked with hundreds, literally hundreds and hundreds of students to help you refine your idea. All right. Again, there's over $5,000 in cash prizes for this competition, and there's, for this competition, no requirement that you have to put this money into your business. We would love you to, but you don't have to. All right. There'll be a grand prize. There's 2 tracks, an upper track for graduate, faculty, staff, and alumni, and an undergraduate track. There's also the People's Choice Award and 2 other very special awards, the Global Innovation Prize which is for ideas that could go global, that have a global impact or global application. And then also a new award this year for the Digital Innovation Award, and that's being sponsored by the Digital Innovation Foundry. And there's potentially 2 of these that are going to be given. So they're looking for, well, before I get there, they'll be offering the cash award, but they'll also be offering special mentorship in support of if you decide to go on to the Be Your Own Boss Bowl competition. They offer some technical resources to help you develop the idea and access to the Digital Innovation Foundry Lab, which is dedicated space. You get your own space in their lab. You can come in and you can work on your idea with some help from the people in that area as well. And then in terms of the criteria for the award, the idea has to apply technology in some interesting or novel way. So if you've got an idea that's based off technology, you really should be thinking about this and make sure that you try to address these 3 criteria on the left-hand side. It's got to be an idea that solves a real business or societal problem, and it's got to be practical. So it's got to be doable. Again, they're not looking for wild flying car ideas that technology isn't there yet, to make them doable. All right, and then the only requirements, if you are chosen for this, you get to keep all your intellectual property, which is awesome. And the second one, and that's not really a requirement, that's just I want to share that with you. And then the second one is they will ask you to present your idea again at the Digital Innovation Foundry Showcase that comes up later in the year. All right, so that's a small thing. This is an example of that document that we talked about and that Lindsay shared, that submission guidelines and tips that takes each of the 6 sections of your submission and it breaks it down and it gives you the questions you need to answer in each section and also shows you some tips. So you see in that little box, it's starting to give you some tips. First impressions are important. Your reviewers are going to read this first. This statement helps them understand your idea. So for each section, we give you little tips to think about to help you better present your idea for the submission. All right. I mentioned, well, we already did tonight's workshop, but I mentioned the 2 mentoring events. I didn't mention Startup Tree. And I know Startup Tree, some of you might be familiar with it. It's our entrepreneurship community platform. It's a lot like LinkedIn, but specifically for entrepreneurs, specifically for people that have ideas, that are thinking about either starting their own business or joining some other startup business. All right. Not everybody wants to go into the corporate world. Some people really like the excitement and the fast pace of being in the startup world. And so Startup Tree is a platform that we use. You can create a simple profile. In fact, you can pull your LinkedIn profile into Startup Tree to do that. And then we have over 70 mentors. These are volunteers from the Temple, Philadelphia community. Some of them are serial entrepreneurs themselves. Some of them are angel investors or venture capital investors, faculty, just other people in the corporate world who have volunteered here at the IEI to help people like you who have an idea but aren't necessarily sure what to do with it or how to move it forward. You can book appointments on Startup Tree with any of our mentors. It's really simple and easy. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy myself or to have one of my student assistants get you up on the platform and get you started. And then also another resource that's available on campus is Blackstone Launchpad. They're in the downstairs of the Student Center. You can get good mentoring help there as well for your idea or your startup. And also, I'll point out that Blackstone Launchpad is also having an idea competition that's taking place at the same time as ours. All right. So Blackstone Launchpad is a national organization, and they are doing a national competition. But the way it's going to work is that all of the local Blackstone Launchpad sites, okay, or locations are going to do their own competition. So we will be having a Blackstone Launchpad idea competition at Temple. And if you make it to the finals, and if you're a finalist and a winner, there's going to be 4 categories for their competition, you'd move on to the national competition. All right, so that's a great opportunity as well. There's money, cash prizes. So please, if you're going to enter our competition, please take a look at theirs. You have nothing to lose. They do ask some different questions than us, okay? Their competition is focused a little more in one area than ours, and vice versa. If you're already have your eye on joining the Blackstone competition and entering that, we hope you enter ours as well. Okay. Again, it's only a little bit more work to actually enter both competitions, and you have nothing to lose, right? Okay. This is the Startup Tree portal. So when you go to submit, you're going to go to Startup Tree as well. You're going to go to this competition page, and on the right-hand side right here, it says that this will be open October 1st. Well, it's actually now open. So right now that'll have a green button and it'll say submit. When you do that, you'll go in and you'll create a draft submission. I'd encourage you to do that. Get familiar with the portal. Don't wait until the final night to do that. Go in, answer some simple questions, put your name in, the school you're in, the year you're graduating, fill out some other questions, and then you can save that. So now we know that you are interested in submitting, and we can follow up with you. You'll have created your draft, and then it'll be easy for you to take what you've written up in answers to these questions, these 6 sections, and then you'll be able to just cut and paste it back into your draft submission. And when you're all done, you press the submit button, and now you've entered. All right. I encourage you to do all your writing and your drafting on a separate Word document. Don't do it live in the portal. It's not really a great word editor. So open a Word document, start writing your submission in that. And then when it comes time, when you're happy with it, it's polished, it's ready to go. Now you can just cut and paste sections of that into the application right up in Startup Tree. It'll be really easy. Make sure you use that tips document. That's really important. And then again, don't wait until the last day to create your draft and submit. Get in there and do that tomorrow, all right, or tonight. You can't start too soon. All right, and last but not least, there are other optional sections. So if you have a drawing of your idea or a picture of it, if you want to create your competitive slide and you think that would really be helpful to explain, you can upload that all into this optional pictures, figures, diagrams section. All right, and that is an upload of a document, and it has to be a PDF document. And then you can also, if you created a short video, a 1 to 2 minute video that you think helps explain your idea, the impact of it, you can also upload that. These will be available to the judges who are going to do the initial review along with the submission. And so we encourage you to do that if you feel that it helps explain your idea. All right, don't do it because you feel you have to. We've had plenty of finalists who've gone on and have not done that. All right. And then there'll be additional questions that you get asked for the Global Innovation Prize and a few additional questions that you're asked for the Digital Innovation Prize. But again, they should be relatively easy for you to answer because it's, it's pretty straightforward. Okay. And don't forget to hit submit.